The blow struck him in the chest and sent him crashing backward onto the arena floor. Ren tasted dust and heard laughter before he could even catch his breath. He lay on the slabs of the blacksmith training yard, staring up at the gray sky, crisscrossed by the framework of the upper tiers. Standing over him was Daigo, a first year, a kid 2 cycles younger than him. The very same one who'd been enrolled 9 days ago and was still mixing up his stances. And this kid had just knocked him down for the 3rd time in a row. The referee raised his hand and declared that Ren had lost the match. The courtyard buzzed. Some thought it was a disgrace, even for a practice match. Others said that someone who let mana leak like a leaky bowl had no place among the students. Ren propped himself up on his elbows. His body was trembling, not from pain, but because the mana had once again drained from his veins within the very first seconds of the fight. He knew how to gather it. He didn't know how to hold on to it. Every breath of power slipped through him like water through his fingers. Instructor Hoyne looked down at him and said nothing. Then he said he'd give him one last cycle. If Ren couldn't demonstrate retention, he'd be sent down, to the lower tier, to join those who had been written off. Daigo held out his hand to help him up, doing so loudly so everyone could see his mercy. Ren didn't take the hand. He stood up on his own. He dusted off his old jacket with its worn elbows and walked away amid the general murmur. He didn't clench his teeth. He simply stared at a single point ahead and didn't look back. Someone called after him that tomorrow would be the same. He knew it was true. He climbed the narrow staircase to his room under the very roof of the workshop wing. The room was barely 3 steps across. A bunk, a small table, a cracked window through which cold air blew in from the upper tiers. He sat down on the bunk and opened his identification plate. On it was the mark he hated, the rank of the weakest. Mana retention, 0.2, with the norm being 1. He stared at the number. 18 years old, and that was all he had. He closed the plate and lay down facing the wall. Daigo's laughter still rang in his ears. He thought that the lower tier was the end. No one ever returns from there. There they patch pipes and haul ore until they're worn out. He closed his eyes, and at that moment something in the room changed. It grew colder than by the window. The light from the oil lamp flickered and swayed even though there was no wind in the room. Ren opened his eyes and turned around. A man was standing in the middle of the room. He was wearing the same old jacket with worn elbows. He had the same face, the same shoulders, the same tilt of the head. It was himself, translucent as smoke over water. The edge of the small table was visible through the figure. Ren didn't scream. He gripped the edge of the cot and stared, unable to look away. The ghost wasn't looking at him. The ghost was staring straight ahead into the void. Then he raised his arms into a guard, the very same guard Ren had held today in the arena, and began to move. Ren recognized every movement. It was his lost fight, that very 3rd bout with Daigo. The ghost repeated it step by step. Here came the approach. Here was the punch that Ren had let get past him. The ghost let it get past him too and staggered backward exactly as Ren had. Then the figure straightened up and began the fight all over again, from the very beginning. The same approach, the same punch, and back again. Ren sat motionless, watching as his own shadow lost, time and time again, the fight he'd lost in real life. He didn't understand what it was. He thought he'd gone mad from the blow to the head. He reached out and touched the figure. His fingers passed through the cold and met nothing. The ghost didn't notice him. It started the fight again. And again. Ren watched this for a long time, an hour, then another. The figure never grew tired. It never lost its breath. It needed nothing. It simply repeated the fight over and over, and with each repetition, something within it changed. On the 10th repetition, the ghost took a different step for the first time. It didn't sway backward to block the blow. It stepped to the side. The blow missed. Ren leaned forward. He didn't sleep that night. He watched as the ghost searched, as it tried one approach after another, as it discarded what didn't work and kept what did. By dawn, the figure was moving completely differently from how Ren had moved in the arena. It was faster in its execution, even though the body remained the same. It had found a way. On the final repetition before daybreak, the ghost finished the fight cleanly. It dodged Daigo's strike, deflected his arm to the side, and landed its own blow precisely under his ribs. The imaginary Daigo fell. The ghost froze. It stood there for a moment. Then it dissolved into the air like smoke in the wind. At that very moment, something clicked in Ren's mind. Not a thought, not a word. A whole sequence of movements seemed to settle into his body all on its own. He suddenly knew how to dodge that strike. He knew it not with his mind but with his hands. He got up from the cot and repeated the movement in the empty room. His body obeyed. The evasion. A sidestep with his arm. A blow to the ribs. Clean. He froze in the middle of the room with his arm outstretched and looked at his palm. He didn't say anything. He just stared at it for a long time. Then he sat back down on the bunk and waited for morning. It was getting light outside the window. From downstairs, he could already hear the voices of students heading to their morning training session. Today it would be Daigo again. Today it would be the same fight all over again. Ren stared at the door and, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel a cold stone in his stomach. He thought of only one movement. Dodge. Parry. Strike. He didn't yet know that this was only the first of many fights he was destined to lose. And to win twice. Ren, the blacksmith's weakest student with almost zero mana retention, loses 3 times in a row to the rookie Daigo and receives one final chance from his mentor, Hoin, under threat of being sent to the lower tier. At night, he sees a ghostly copy of himself who, without sleep or fatigue, repeats the lost fight until he finds a way to win. And at dawn, all the experience he gained transfers into Ren's body. It's important to remember the mechanics. The Phantom practices the exact technique that humiliated Ren and transfers the mastered skill for the body, not through memory. Ren stood on the marked line in the same courtyard and watched as Daigo stepped forward to face him. The morning was cold and damp. The arena slabs glistened with the night's moisture. The students had gathered around the edge of the circle and had already begun to snicker. Someone said loudly that the holy bowl had come for the 4th time. Daigo smiled broadly and confidently. He bowed as he'd been taught and said he'd try to be quick so that Ren wouldn't be too embarrassed. Instructor Hoin stood to the side with his arms crossed, his face that of a man who'd already made up his mind. He raised his hand and gave the signal. Daigo gathered his mana. Ren felt his own power surge through his veins and immediately begin to fade. Just like always. He had a few seconds. In the past, that had only been enough time to lose. Daigo went for that very same move. The very same one from yesterday. The very same one the ghost had repeated 30 times that night. And Ren's body did something it had never done before. It didn't wait for the blow. It moved out of the way on its own. Daigo's strike passed through empty air. Ren caught his arm, pulled it aside, and landed his own strike right under the ribs. Just like at night, just as the ghost had taught him. Daigo gasped and doubled over. He sat down on the wet tiles and looked up in surprise. The courtyard fell silent. The laughter cut off mid-laugh. The referee didn't raise his hand right away because he couldn't believe what he'd seen. Then he finally awarded the point to Ren. The silence lingered for another moment, and the courtyard buzzed with a different kind of murmur, not mocking but bewildered. Someone said it was an accident. Someone said that Daigo had slipped on the wet ground. Daigo himself stood up and demanded a rematch. He said he hadn't been ready. Mentor Hoin watched Ren intently and silently. Then he gave the signal again. Daigo gathered his mana fiercely and quickly. This time he wasn't smiling. He changed his approach. He went for it differently. And then Ren's defense broke again. His mana drained away. His body was left without strength. And this new strike, which the ghost hadn't seen coming, landed cleanly. Ren found himself back on the slabs. The courtyard burst into laughter of relief, as if the usual order had been restored. Someone said that was all there was to it. Daigo regained his smile and said the first time had been a fluke. The referee declared a draw after 2 falls. Ren got to his feet. He wasn't angry about having fallen. He understood the main point. The ghost teaches him only about the fight that has already happened. Against a new move, he was helpless once more. That meant the ghost needed to see this new move too. That meant he had to lose one more time to win tomorrow. He looked at Daigo and said he was ready for a rematch any day. Daigo took this as insolence and promised to humiliate him completely. Master Hoin dismissed the circle, but held Ren back. He asked where Ren had learned that evasion technique. They don't teach that to the weakest students. Ren said he'd been practicing at night. That was only half the truth, but he didn't say any more than that. Hoin looked at him again with the kind of gaze one uses to inspect a tool, deciding whether it's fit for use. Then he said that one clean move doesn't make a student, and he left. Ren was left alone at the edge of the courtyard. Only one person approached him, a skinny guy with scorched fingers named Theo, who worked in the lower workshop and hardly ever spoke to anyone. He said he'd seen both departures. He said the first departure wasn't accidental. He said this quietly so no one else would hear. Ren looked at him in surprise. For the first time in a long while, someone had stood beside him rather than across from him. Theo said he didn't understand how, but he believed his own eyes. Then he walked away to his pipes. Ren walked around in a daze all day, replaying Daigo's new approach in his mind. He tried to memorize every detail. He knew that at night the ghost would only be able to repeat what the body remembered exactly, so he had to remember everything. In the evening, he went up to his room. He sat down on his bunk, and he waited. The light from the lamp flickered sooner than he expected. A chill spread through the room. The ghost stood in the middle of it, but this time it didn't assume its old stance. It stood facing Daigo's new move, the very one from earlier that day. Ren leaned forward, so the ghost was taking on its latest defeat, the most recent one. The figure began the fight. A new approach, a new strike. The ghost let it pass, just as Ren had, and started over. Ren lay on his side and watched. He watched as his own shadow searched for the key to the strike that had knocked him down onto the floor today. An hour. Another. On the 20th try, the ghost found the first clue. On the 40th, he landed the strike. By midnight, the fight was going smoothly. Ren fell asleep at dawn with a single thought in his mind. Every defeat is a lesson that someone else will learn in his place. He didn't know that new trouble was coming after this, that others' eyes had already begun to notice the overly rapid growth of the leaky bowl, and that noticing such things from the outside is dangerous. Ren wins his first match against Daigo with the exact move the ghost taught him, but loses the second match to a new, unfamiliar opponent because the ghost only teaches from battles that have already taken place. He realizes the pattern. To defeat a new technique, he must first lose to it so that the ghost can see it. His first ally appears. Theo, a worker in the lower workshop who noticed that Ren's evasion wasn't accidental, and Mentor Hoyne begins to take notice. The next morning, the ghost faded away again at dawn and the new fight became fully ingrained in Ren's body. He woke up knowing exactly how to break Daigo's fresh attack. He repeated the move in the cramped room and his body responded without a hitch. Evasion under the arm. Breaking the strike line. A counter to the open side. He went down to the courtyard before anyone else. He wanted to check one thing. How long would the ghost's gift remain in his veins? He stood by the wall and began moving alone without an opponent, running through both techniques he'd learned. His body remembered everything. So the experience didn't fade away at dawn. It remained. It accumulated. The courtyard filled with students. Daigo arrived, surrounded by his own people, and spoke loudly. He announced to everyone that today he would settle the matter of the leaky bowl once and for all. Instructor Hoyne stepped forward and designated the match as an exhibition. He said he wanted to see Ren's control, not just random flourishes. The circle closed. Ren stepped onto the marked area. Daigo gathered his mana. Ren gathered his and felt the familiar sensation as it crept out of his veins. But now he knew both of the opening moves Daigo used to start the fight. Daigo went first and chose yesterday's new move, the very one that had knocked Ren down in the second round. And Ren's body meant it ready. Dodge. Break. A counter to the side. Daigo didn't have time to realize what had happened. He found himself on the slabs for the second time in 2 days. The courtyard gasped. This time, no one mentioned the wet slabs. The slubs were dry. Daigo jumped up, his face red with shame and anger. He demanded they continue and charge into the third move. Another new one. The one the ghost hadn't seen. And Ren's hold broke again on that turn. The mana was gone. The body was left empty. Daigo grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him around. Ren held his ground but conceded a point. The score was tied. The crowd wavered between two moods. Some were still waiting for the leaky vessel to break. Others were looking at Ren differently for the first time. Instructor Hoyne stepped forward and stopped the match at a tie. He said he'd seen enough. He moved right up close to Ren and spoke quietly so the courtyard wouldn't hear. He asked directly, "How can a student with a mana retention of 2/10 execute a maneuver that even he can barely maintain?" Ren repeated that he practiced at night. Hoyne shook his head. He said that Ren's body couldn't hold mana for more than a few seconds, and that this couldn't be remedied through training. So it's not about mana. That means Ren has found a way to win without any mana retention at all through pure movement alone. And that's either a great talent or something meant to be revealed at a higher level. Ren remained silent. Hoyne looked at him for a long time. Then he said something strange. He said he'd seen something like that once, a long time ago, and that the man had met a bad end because he'd been spotted before he becomes strong enough. He told Ren to lose at least half of his public sparring matches from now on, for his own good. Then he walked away. Ren stood there, not immediately realizing that his mentor had just defended him. Theo found him after practice by the lower staircase. He said a rumor had already spread through the workshops about the weakest one who, in just 2 days, had started beating the top rookie in sparring. He said the rumor had reached the foreman of the blacksmith's guild, all the way to a man named Garn. And Garn doesn't like it when apprentices progress outside the official records, because progress outside the records throws off his accounting. And Garn keeps track of the entire workshop and his share of its profits in his records. Ren asked what the consequences might be. Theo said that Garn knows how to find reasons to send an apprentice down, quietly, on paper, so that no one would object, and that now Ren had more of those reasons, not fewer. Ren realized something simple. He thought his problem was his weak body. It turned out the problem was that his body had suddenly stopped being helpless. His victory in the courtyard hadn't bought him peace of mind, but rather the attention of someone for whom his growth was a threat. He thanked Theo and went up to his room. He sat down on his cot and began to recall Daigo's third move down to the last detail, so he could pass it on to the ghost that night. The light flickered. A chill crept across the floor. A figure stood in the middle of the room, assuming the stance for the third move, and began to search. Ren watched her, his thoughts no longer on Daigo. He was thinking about the overseer Garn, whom he had never seen. About the man who would soon come to break him on paper. Against paper, the ghost was useless. The night fighter knew only how to fight. Ren lay there watching as the shadow practiced the strike for him, and realized that the next enemy wouldn't be so easily defeated. Ren confirmed that the ghost's experience remains in the body forever and took a second round from Daigo, but once again lost to the third new technique. Master Hoyne surmises that Ren is winning without grappling, relying solely on pure movement. He hints that he's seen something similar before and secretly orders him to deliberately lose half his fights so as not to stand out. A new major threat emerges. Garn, the workshop overseer who keeps track of everyone in the workshop, learns of ours, and such rapid growth disrupts his plan and gives him a reason to downgrade the apprentice on paper. Garn arrived 2 days later, not in the courtyard, but straight into the workshop wing during the morning shift. Ren recognized him immediately, even though it was their first meeting. The foreman was a heavy, slow-moving man who carried an ID plate instead of a weapon. He walked through the workshop, checking the apprentice's marks against his records as if he were counting sacks. 2 of his apprentices followed him. He stopped at the table where Ren was shaping a workpiece and looked at Ren's badge. He said in an even voice that according to the lists, this apprentice was ranked as the weakest and was in line for the lower tier. Yet according to rumors, this same apprentice was beating up the top newcomers in the courtyard. Garn said he didn't like it when the paperwork said one thing and the courtyard said another, because one of them was lying, and he would verify the paperwork, not the courtyard. Ren understood where this was going. Garn announced that he was ordering Ren to undergo a verification test of his grip strength in front of witnesses. In 3 days, if the test shows the same 2/10 as before, then all of his victories in the courtyard are a fraud. And fraud means falsifying the score. And for falsifying the score, they demote you without exception. Ren stood there in silence. He knew the test would show exactly 2/10, because that was the truth. His body couldn't hold mana, and it wouldn't hold it during the test. The Phantom put up a fight. The Phantom wouldn't let him hold on. Garn smiled with the smirk of a man who had set a trap and walked away. Theo approached as soon as the overseer had disappeared. He said he understood everything. Garn cornered Ren where both doors led downward. If Ren wins the trial, it means he faked the weakest rating to get special treatment, and he'll be expelled. If he loses the trial, it means his courtyard victories were a sham, and he'll be expelled too. Either outcome means the lower tier. Ren sat down on a bench and began to think. He thought about the fact that the ghost could do only one thing: to win a battle that's already lost. The trial isn't a battle, so the ghost is directly useless here. But Ren began to think differently. He asked himself what the trial really was. The trial is also an opponent, with its own rules, with its own approach. And if he ever loses this stasis by the book, then at night the ghost will perceive it as a battle, and it will start looking for a way to get through. Ren went to the workshop archives and, for a couple of coins, learned from the scribe exactly how the stasis of retention works. The apprentice places a hand on the measuring bowl and pours in mana. The bowl counts how much power remains in the veins after 10 counts. Leaky veins lose almost everything. Full ones hold it. Ren understood the key point. The test measures not how much mana you've gathered, but how much you prevented from leaking out over 10 counts. So the goal isn't to retain more, but to stem a leak, even if only for a short count. He returned to his quarters and that evening did something he hadn't done before. He didn't wait to be defeated in the courtyard. He conducted the test himself. He borrowed an old measuring bowl from Theo, one that had been decommissioned, placed his hand on it, and channeled mana into it. The cup showed 2/10. He had deliberately failed the measurement with his own hands. Right there, in front of him. That night, the light flickered. A chill spread through the room. And the ghost did not assume a fighting stance. It sat down at a small table in front of an identical ghostly bowl and placed its hand on it. Ren froze. So the figure accepts any defeat. Not just in battle. Any task he lost fairly. The ghost poured mana into the bowl. A leak. 2/10. It withdrew its hand and started over. Ren watched, holding his breath. The shadow tried again and again. It changed how it gathered power, how it channeled it into its veins, the order in which it tensed them. An hour. Another. On the 100th try, the bowl before the ghost showed 3/10. Ren leaned forward so far he nearly fell off a cot. By midnight, the ghost had found a way to briefly constrict the veins so that the mana wouldn't escape all at once. It didn't seal the holes. It clamped them shut for 10 counts using willpower and order. By dawn, the ghost's bowl read exactly 1. Normal. The figure withdrew its hand and faded away. And it wasn't fear that settled into Ren's body. It was a method. He sat down in his bowl and placed his hand on it. He gathered mana in the order the ghost had shown him. He clamped down on his meridians. He channeled it in. He counted to 10. He removed his hand. The bowl showed a 1. He stared at the number for a long time. He said nothing. He knew this wasn't a cure. In 20 counts, it would all leak away just as before. But the measurement lasts 10. And 10 was enough now. He lay down and waited for the morning check. He was no longer afraid of the measurement. He was afraid of something else, that Gar knew how to change the rules on the fly, and that the man who set the trap doesn't like it when his prey escapes unscathed. Warden Garn puts Ren in a no-win situation through the retention check. Victory means a charge of tampering with the reading, and defeat means that his courtyard victories are fake, and both outcomes lead to the lower tier. Ren makes a key discovery. The ghost processes not only fights but any task that's been honestly lost, so Ren deliberately fails the measurement in front of himself, and overnight, the ghost finds a way to clamp down on the leaky veins for a brief 10 counts and bring the bowl up to standard. It's important to remember, this method is temporary and lasts only about 10 counts, and Garn is capable of changing the test conditions. The test was scheduled for midday in the measuring hall of the master's wing. Garn gathered the witnesses from his list. Instructor Hoyne arrived uninvited and stood against the wall with his arms crossed. Daigo was also there in the front row, waiting with obvious glee for the leaky bowl to fail. The measuring bowl stood on a stone table in the middle of the hall. Garn held his record plate and spoke in a steady, authoritative tone. He announced to everyone that Ren, the listed as the weakest student, was defeating the top novices in the courtyard, and that the bowl would now reveal the truth. He ordered Ren to step forward and place his hand on it. Ren stepped forward. He gathered his mana in the order the Night Fighter had taught him. He clamped down on his meridians with sheer willpower, just as the ghost had taught him. He placed his hand on the bowl and channeled his power into it. The Overseer began counting aloud. 1, 2, 3. Ren held the clamp and felt his meridians tremble with the strain. 5, 6. Mana was straining to break free, but the sequence held it in check. 8, 9, 10. Garn fell silent and looked at the bowl. The bowl showed a 1. The standard. The hall fell silent. Daigo rose from his seat and said that this couldn't be. The witnesses began to whisper. Garn stared at the number, and his impassive face flinched for the first time. He'd been expecting 2/10. He'd gotten the standard result. His trap had snapped shut on nothing. Mentor Hoyne, standing by the wall, gave himself a barely perceptible nod. Ren removed his hand from the bowl precisely on the 10th count while the clamp still held. He knew that on the 11th count, everything would have slid down. He had won exactly within the 10 counts measured by the bowl. But Garn wouldn't be Garn if he gave up after a single throw. He quickly composed himself and said that a single measurement was a fluke, not proof. He announced that he would check again immediately. And right then, he changed the rule. He said that from now on, the bowl would count not to 10, but to 20. Theo, standing by the door, turned pale. Ren realized that the trap had been reset. The ghost method only held for 10 counts. At 20, his veins would burst, the bowl would show a leak, and Garn would get his proof of cheating. Ren stood before the bowl, quickly doing the math in his head. The Night Fighter didn't work through 20 counts, only 10. That meant he didn't have a body for 20. Against the new rule, he was helpless once more, just as he was against Daigo's new move. and Ren did the only thing he knew how to do in the face of a fresh defeat. He accepted it. He placed his hand on the bowl as the count reached 20, knowing in advance that he would lose. He poured in mana and held the seal as long as he could. 1, 5, 10. At 12, the veins trembled. At 15, the formation crumbled. By 20, the bowl showed 3/10, a leak. The hall exhaled. Daigo laughed with relief. Garn straightened up and solemnly announced that this was the whole truth. The first measurement had been a trick, and on an honest count, the student was leaky, just as recorded. So the courtyard victories were a fraud. Which meant forgery, which meant failure. He had already lifted the tablet to record the decision. And then Mentor Hoyne spoke up. He pushed off the wall and spoke quietly, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. He asked Garn since when the hold test had been counted to 20. He said that the blacksmith's code of measurement only recognized counting up to 10, and that counting to 20 wasn't a test of the apprentice, but an arbitrary invention of the overseer. And making up a measurement in front of witnesses was already forgery on the part of the one keeping the record. Garn froze with the tablet raised. The witnesses exchanged glances. Hoyne said that the first measurement had been according to the code and met the standard, and that according to the regulations was sufficient. Ren realized that his mentor had just covered for him a second time. Garn looked at Hoyne with the quiet hatred of a man whose trap had been broken twice. He lowered the plate and said he would remember this day. He said this to Hoyne but was looking at Ren. Then he turned and walked out with his men. The hall buzzed with murmurs. Someone remarked for the first time that a leaky bowl might not be so leaky after all. Daigo left without saying a word, his face that of a man who'd been passed over. Hoyne approached Ren and said quietly that he wouldn't bail them out a second time, that Garn would now proceed not by the book, but differently, and that a man with a tarnished record takes revenge in a dirty way. He told Ren to be ready. Ren thanked him. He went up to his quarters, completely drained. He lay down on his bunk and began to think, not about Daigo, more about the bowl. He thought about how every time he won, his enemy grew larger, not smaller. First, a rookie, then the workshop overseer, and now the overseer, harboring a grudge and seeking not a piece of paper, but an opportunity. He thought about how the ghost was teaching him to fight and to hold the bowl, but wasn't teaching him to defend himself against a person who would strike from around a corner, and that he would have to learn that on his own. The light in the room wavered. A chill crept across the floor. A figure stood up in the middle of the room. But this time, it didn't assume a fighting stance or sit down at the bowl. It simply stood there, staring into the void, as if waiting for the next defeat so it could seize upon it. Ren looked at it and realized that there would be many defeats ahead, and that each of them now work in his favor. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, a new game would begin, and Garn would make the first move. During the test, Ren passed the regulation check up to 10 counts and met the standard, thereby breaking Garn's trap, but the overseer arbitrarily changed the rule to 20 counts, where the Phantom's technique wouldn't hold, and Ren failed the second test. Mentor Hoyne saved Ren a second time by pointing out that the count to 20 rule violates the blacksmith's code of measurement, and that the first test, as per the code, is sufficient. Garn backs down but harbors resentment. According to Hoyne, you will now seek revenge not by the book, but through underhanded means, while Ren realizes that every victory he wins creates a greater enemy, and that his ghost does not teach him how to defend against a blow coming from around a corner. Garn struck 3 days later not on paper, but through people. Ren learned of this from Theo at dawn. Theo ran into the workshop wing with his fingers singed and said that a rumor was circulating on the lower levels that the Holy Bowl was stealing mana from other students, as if Ren were growing stronger precisely because he was secretly drawing on others' power. The rumor was absurd but sticky. Theo O said that rumors like this aren't spread for no reason. They're followed by what's called a peer review, when the students themselves catch the culprit and drag him to the supervisor. And then it looks as if the workshop itself has restored order, and the supervisor had nothing to do with it. Ren understood the ploy. Garn didn't want to touch him in front of Hoyne. Garn wanted Ren to be broken by someone else's hands. Ren went out for his morning training and immediately sensed a change. People were looking at him differently, not with mockery as before, but with quiet anger. Someone stepped aside as he passed. Someone called him a thief as he passed. Daigo kept his distance and watched with the interest of a man who had found a new ally in the form of public rumor. By noon, 3 senior students from Garn's class approached Ren by the courtyard wall. They said the workshop wanted to check his veins. If he had nothing to hide, they said, he would calmly allow himself to be examined. They positioned themselves to cut off his escape route. Ren realized this wasn't an examination. It was a pretext. If he resisted, they'd label him a defiant thief and drag him downstairs. If he agreed, they'd find anything they wanted in his riddled veins and call it evidence. Once again, he found himself at a crossroads where both paths led to a precipice. He thought quickly. He couldn't fight all three of them. The ghost had given him one fight, not three at once, so he needed to take the matter to where the ghost operated. He said loudly enough for the whole courtyard to hear that he wasn't afraid of an inspection, but not in a dark corner, rather in a one-on-one duel. He challenged the eldest of the three to a duel in front of all the witnesses. He said that if he lost, he would go to the overseer himself and let him inspect his veins. And if he won, the rumors of theft would die down. The courtyard buzzed with excitement. Refusing in front of everyone would mean admitting that the issue wasn't about the inspection, but about revenge. The eldest, named Kurt, was a head taller than Ren and had much better mana control. He smirked and accepted the challenge, confident of an easy victory. The circle closed. Mentor Hoyne appeared at the edge of the courtyard and didn't intervene but stayed to watch. The fight began. Kurt came out strong right away, and Ren lost to him in the very first seconds. His mana drained away. His body was left empty. The fight began. Kurt came out swinging hard right away, and Ren was outmatched in the very first seconds. His mana drained away. His body was left empty. Kurt struck him in the chest, the shoulder, and the side. Ren fell and got up only to fall again. The courtyard roared. The hole-in-the-wall thief was being beaten in broad daylight, and everyone was fine with it. Ren held on only through sheer stubbornness. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to remember. Every one of Kurt's moves, every blow, every habit of the heavy fighter shifting his weight to his front leg. He was committing this fight to memory down to the last detail, just as one gathers raw materials. Kurt knocked him down for the third time, and the referee declared Ren the loser. The courtyard celebrated. Ren lay on the concrete, battered, and heard them decide that he was now required to go to the warden. He propped himself up on his elbows and said through his split lips that he would go. But not today. According to the agreement, there was only one bout, and he had lost fairly. He would fulfill the agreement tomorrow. Kurt, satisfied, agreed to give him a day. He was certain that Hole wouldn't go anywhere. Hoyne, standing by the wall, looked at Ren with the lingering gaze of a man who was beginning to understand more than he was saying. Ren crawled back to his quarters on all fours once the courtyard had emptied. He lay down on his cot covered in blood, feeling neither pain nor fear. He felt only one thing. He had lost the battle that mattered. He had surrendered himself entirely to Kurt's ghost. The light flickered earlier than usual. A chill spread through the room. A figure took a defensive stance against Kurt's heavy advance and began to search. Ren watched with bleary eyes as his shadow fell time and again beneath Kurt and rose time and again. An hour, then another. On the 40th repetition, the phantom caught onto Kurt's habit of shifting his weight forward. By the 80th, he'd learned to anticipate that shift and knock the heavy fighter down with his own weight. By dawn, the fight was going smoothly. Ren fell asleep knowing that tomorrow he wouldn't be going to the overseer. Tomorrow he would step into the ring again. And the rumor of theft would die along with Kurt's confidence. Garn takes dirty revenge and spreads a rumor that Ren steals others' mana so that the students will deal with him themselves while the overseer stays out of it. 3 of Garn's men, led by the burly Kurt, corner Ren under the pretense of an inspection, but Ren turns the situation into an open fight by promising to go to the supervisor if he loses. He deliberately loses to Kurt so that the ghost can experience the full brunt of the fight, and overnight the ghost learns to take Kurt down using his own weight. Tomorrow's rematch is meant to put an end to the theft rumor. The next morning, the ghost had vanished, and the full brunt of Kurt's heavy blow had settled into Ren's body. He woke up battered on the outside but sharp on the inside. He went down to the courtyard, where Kurt was already waiting in the ring, confident that the Hollow One had come to surrender. Instead, Ren reminded everyone of their agreement in front of the crowd. He said that the loser would go to the overseer, and that he was ready to repeat the match since the rumor of theft was still alive. The courtyard came alive. Kurt frowned. According to the agreement, there was to be only one fight, and Ren had lost it. But to refuse in front of everyone would be to show fear. Kurt agreed with a bitter smirk, confident he would take down the whole face again. Coach Hoyne stood at the edge of the courtyard. The circle closed. Kurt went in with that same heavy move, the very one that had knocked Ren down 3 times yesterday, the very one the ghost had been reenacting all night, and Ren's body met him ready. It didn't just absorb the blow. It caught Kurt's shift of weight to his front leg and pulled the heavy fighter right where he was already falling. Kurt collapsed under his own weight and slid across the slabs. The courtyard fell silent. The large senior student lay there, knocked down like a battered bowl. Kurt leaped to his feet in rage and charged again. Same move, same result. He fell for the second time. Ren didn't hit him unnecessarily. He simply knocked him down every time with the same move, which he could now read like an open book. Kurt got up for the third time, breathing heavily and with the look of a man who no longer understood what was happening. He changed his approach. He went a different way. And Ren's grip broke immediately. His mana was gone. Kurt's new move caught him in the shoulder. Ren held his ground but realized he couldn't keep fighting. One more new approach and he'd be helpless again. He shouted that the score was even and that the agreement had been for a single match, not 10. He suggested to Kurt that they call it a draw. Kurt, angry and flustered, agreed because he didn't want to risk a third takedown in front of everyone. The referee declared a draw, but the crowd had already made up its own mind. Someone who steals mana can't take down Kurt with his own weight and pure technique. The rumor about the theft was debunked right then and there. Someone said that Garn just wanted to take down the Holy One and made up the theft story. Ren realized he hadn't won the fight, he'd won the rumor. Kurt approached him after the round, his anger gone. He said quietly that he fought 100 students and feared no one, but today, for the first time, he hadn't understood his opponent. He asked point blank whether Ren was stealing mana or not. Ren said no, and that if he were stealing it, he'd hold on to it for more than 10 counts, but he doesn't. Kurt looked at him and believed him. He said he'd tell his people that the rumor was groundless. So Ren gained neither an ally nor an enemy where Garn had hoped to find an executioner. Hoyne beckoned Ren over. He said that the Overseer had failed his second attempt and would now take a third path. He said that a dishonorable man, having failed through his students' hands, turns to those above him. He said that Garn holds a cut from the workshop and that above Garn stands the tier commander, who also gets a share of that cut. And that if Garn takes the matter to the commandant, it's no longer a rumor or a rumor mill, it's authority. Ren asked what the commandant wanted. Hoyne said the commandant wanted silence and order in the records, and Ren had become a disturbance in the records. And commandants eliminate disturbances. Ren went up to his quarters and was no longer thinking about Kurt. He was thinking about the man they called the tier commander, a man he'd never seen. Against the commander, there was neither battle nor a cup. There was only power. He lay down on his bunk and watched as the light in the room flickered and an empty figure rose, awaiting a new defeat. He realized that soon he would lose something far greater than a single duel, and that the ghost would have to look for a way where he had previously sought only blows. Ren takes his revenge and knocks Kurt down with his own weight, thereby dispelling the rumor of mana theft, while Kurt himself, having come to believe that Ren is not a thief, ceases to be an enemy. For the first time, the courtyard sides with the Holy Cup, but Hoyne warns that the loser twice will have his case escalated to the tier commander, who ranks above the Overseer and shares a cut of the profits with him, and the commander deals not with rumors, but with authority. Ren realizes that his next enemy is greater than all the previous ones, and that against raw authority he has neither battle nor the bowl. The commandant summoned Ren a week later, and did so not rudely, but politely, which was worse. A clerk came for Ren and said that the tier commandant wished to see the apprentice regarding his transfer. The word transfer was a euphemism for the lower tier, put more elegantly. Ren walked through the blacksmith galleries, which he had never seen before. Upstairs, everything was cleaner and quieter. Less soot, more stone. The commandant received him in a hall with a tall window overlooking the foundry tiers. His name was Osmond. He was not young, thin, and spoke calmly, like a man who had no need to raise his voice. Standing next to him was Garn, holding his plaque with the air of a victor. Osmond said that a dispute regarding one student had reached him, the weakest according to the records, but a notable figure in the courtyard. He said he didn't like it when the records and the courtyard diverged, because a divergence was a crack, and he sealed cracks while they were still small. He said he was ready to seal this crack by transferring the student down to where the courtyard and the records would once again align. Garn smiled slightly. Ren realized the matter had already been decided and that he'd been called not to argue but to make the announcement. Against the authorities, the ghost was powerless. But Ren remembered how the ghost had sought a solution in the bowl rather than in battle. So any problem can be broken down and analyzed. He looked at Osmond and realized that he wasn't dealing with an evil man, but with someone who valued order in numbers, and that Garn had presented Ren to him as disorder. That meant there was only one way to win, to show that the disorder wasn't Ren, but Garn's own record-keeping. Ren spoke calmly. He said he was ready to go down if the commandant deemed it necessary, but he asked for one thing. Let them record the transfer honestly. Let them state the reason on paper. Not theft, which didn't happen and has already been refuted by the court. Not forgery of a mark, which didn't occur because the first measurement, taken according to regulations, showed the standard in the presence of witnesses and instructor Hoyne. But the real reason. That the student had met the retention standard, yet the warden was still demanding he be demoted. Osmond looked up. He looked at Garn. He asked if it was true that the first measurement, according to the regulations, had shown he met the standard. Garn hesitated and said that the second measurement, up to 20, had shown a leak. Osmond asked since when measurements had been taken up to 20. He repeated what Hoyne had said. The regulations only specify counting up to 10. Garn said he wanted to verify the result more reliably. Osmond set the plate aside. He said slowly that the supervisor had adjusted the standard twice to suit the student, once up to 20, and now he's dragging down the one who passed the standard according to the regulations. He said that this was no longer an apprentice's measurement, but a measurement tailored to the desired answer, and that tailored measurement was precisely the crack he was covering up. Only the crack turned out to be in a different place than where Garn had indicated. Garn turned pale. He began to say that he was acting in the name of order. Osmond cut him off. He said that in the name of order, standards aren't made up. He refused to demote Ren. He said he would leave the student where he was until the next fair assessment according to the regulations, and that he himself would now keep an eye on the supervisor. Ren left the hall unscathed. He realized he hadn't defeated the commandant. He had merely shown him that the real disorder stemmed from Garn. Osmond hadn't removed Ren, he removed the crack, and the crack turned out to be the overseer. But Ren knew the value of that. Garn left the hall humiliated in front of his superior, and now hated Ren with the kind of hatred reserved only for one's own shame. Theo was waiting for him downstairs and couldn't believe that Ren had returned not downstairs but to his own quarters. Ren told him everything. Theo said that the commandant was a wall that couldn't be broken through by force, but could be bypassed by showing her a blatant lie, and that Ren had just done exactly that. But Theo was gloomy. He said that a humiliated warden was worse than before, that now Garn would lose his position if he didn't fight back and would be fighting for his own skin. And a man fighting for his skin pays no heed to either the regulations or the court. Ren went up to his quarters. He thought about how every victory doesn't end the war but escalates it. The court, the overseer, the commandant. And now the overseer, backed into a corner by his own superior. He lay down and watched as an empty ghost rose in the room. He realized that soon he would lose something without any rules at all, and that he would have to prepare for a blow that would be neither a duel nor a challenge. Osmond, the tier commandant, a man of order in numbers, summons Ren to have him transferred down, but Ren doesn't argue. Instead, he demands that a legitimate reason be recorded and reveals that Garn twice altered the measurement to yield the desired result. Osmond sees that the real flaw in the records is Garn himself. He leaves Ren in place and places the overseer under his supervision. But Garn, disgraced in front of his superior, is now fighting for his own position and his life, and according to Theo, will act without regard for the regulations or the courtyard. A few days later, Garn struck without following the rules, aiming not at Ren, but at Theo. Ren found out about this when a boy from the lower workshop ran up and said that Theo had been captured. The overseer accused him of damaging government-owned materials and locked him up pending an investigation. The punishment for damaging government property was severe, the lower tier with no return. Ren understood the move immediately. Gan couldn't get to him directly while under the commandant's supervision, so he struck the only one standing next to him. He wasn't striking at the enemy, but at what the enemy held dear. Ren went to the lower workshop where Theo was being held. Garn was waiting for him there, as if he knew Ren would come. The overseer stated matter-of-factly that the workpiece had been damaged during Theo's shift and that the evidence was clear. He showed them the cracked mold. He said that Theo would be sent down unless someone took the blame, and he looked at Ren. Ren understood the dilemma. If he took the blame, he would go down himself, freeing Theo. If he didn't, Theo would go down, and Ren would know he hadn't saved the only one who had stood by his side. Garn had finally found a trap that caught not a body or a chalice, but a conscience. The ghost didn't work against one's conscience. Ren stood there, staring at the cracked uniform. And suddenly, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The crack in the uniform wasn't from an impact, but from the casting process. He worked with blanks long enough to recognize that. The mold hadn't cracked during Theo's shift, and it cracked during the cooling phase much earlier, and the crack simply hadn't been noticed until Garn needed evidence. Ren realized that this wasn't about the fight or conscience. It was another problem with a false premise. like the freeze until 20 challenge. Just like the rumor about the theft, Garn had once again tailored the answer to suit his own needs. So this could be dismantled in the same way by showing that the premise was false. Ren said loudly so the workshop workers could hear that he wouldn't take the blame because there was no blame to bear. He said the crack in the mold was caused by the casting process, not by sabotage, that it predated Theo's shift, and that anyone who'd ever done casting would see that. Garn said no one would believe an apprentice over the foreman. And there was truth to that. Ren's word against Garn's carried little weight. So Ren did what he always did. He didn't argue with words. He took the matter to where it could be verified. He asked for the foundry foreman to be summoned. Not Garn's man, but the old foundry foreman who was respected for not taking sides with anyone. Ren said that if the master confirmed the defect, he himself would go down without argument. But if the master said the crack was a casting defect, then Theo would be cleared and the matter closed. The workers began to murmur. Refusing in front of them would mean showing that Garn was afraid of an inspection. The foreman, backed into a corner by his own ploy, agreed through gritted teeth. They sent for the old master. The old master arrived looking grim, examined the mold, and ran his finger along the crack. He said immediately and without hesitation that it was a casting defect, that the mold had cracked while cooling many shifts ago, that whoever had pinned this on the apprentice either couldn't tell the difference between damage and a defect or had done it on purpose. He said this while looking straight at Garn. The workshop fell silent. Theo was released. The workers looked at the foreman differently than before. Garn realized he had lost for the third time in a row, and now in front of witnesses who would spread the news throughout the level. He left without saying a word. Theo walked out pale and didn't immediately believe he was free. He told Ren that he already thought he was going down there for good. He said that no one had ever stood up for him like that before. Ren said that Theo had been the first to stand up for him when the whole courtyard was laughing, that now they were even. Theo shook his head and said they weren't even, that he wouldn't forget this. So, for the first time, Ren had someone connected to him not by self-interest, but by a debt of the heart. But Ren's joy didn't last long. He realized that Garn was now a broken man, disgraced 3 times over under the Commandant's watch, with a workshop that no longer feared him. A man like that no longer seeks revenge through cunning. He seeks it desperately. Ren went up to his room with Theo, and they talked late into the night. Theo said he'd seen not anger, but fear in Garn's eyes. And a warden driven by fear is capable of things a warden in a position of power would never do. Ren lay down and watched as an empty ghost rose. He thought that Garn's next strike would be the last for one of them, and that it would be a direct attack, not a trap. Unable to get to Ren under the Commandant's watchful eye, Garn struck Theo, accusing him of damaging a government-issued workpiece, and put Ren with the choice of taking the blame and going down or abandoning his only friend. Ren notices that the crack in the casting is a manufacturing defect, not tampering, and summons an independent elderly master caster who, in front of witnesses, confirms this and exonerates Theo, humiliating Garn for the 3rd time. Theo becomes a friend out of the goodness of his heart, not for personal gain, but 3 times humiliated Garn, facing the threat of losing his position, shifts from cunning traps to desperation and prepares a direct attack. Garn attacked at night, and he wasn't alone. Ren was awakened when his door was blown off its hinges with a single blow. 3 men stood in the doorway. 2 were former members of the Overseer's staff, armed with clubs, and behind them stood Garn himself, with the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. The Overseer said quietly that the Commandant kept an eye on paperwork, not the dark stairwells. That a clumsy student could simply fall from a landing at night, and no regulations would account for it. He'd come to deal with the commotion himself since no one else had. Ren jumped out of his bunk. He was alone against 3 of them in a cramped, dark room. The ghost had given him 1 fight, not 3 at once, and not a nighttime attack, a scenario he'd never lost and therefore had never practiced. He had no ready answer. The first attacker swung his club, and Ren's body moved of its own accord, but not out of the ghost's teachings. It moved from all the fights combined that lay within him, from the evasion techniques Daigo had taught him, from breaking the line of attack, from the ability to take down an opponent using their own weight, which Kurt had taught him. Ren didn't think. He gathered everything he learned into his single movement. He dodged the club just as he had dodged Daigo. He grabbed the attacker's arm and pulled it using the opponent's own weight, just as he had taken down Kurt. The first attacker slammed into the table and went still. In that moment, Ren realized something important. The ghost had taught him each fighting technique separately, but the experience had accumulated, and now his body knew how to piece the lessons together on its own, even where there was no ready answer. The second attacker struck from the side. Ren took the blow to his shoulder and, as always, couldn't hold his mana, but a symbol-held breath was enough to deliver a counter to the exposed side, just as the bull had taught him. The second attacker doubled over against the wall. Only Garn remained. The overseer looked down at his two men on the floor and at the battered student standing unscathed in the middle of the wrecked room. He lunged at Ren himself heavily and viciously. Ren stepped aside. Garn was not a fighter but a man of the book, and he moved like someone who was out of practice with fighting. Ren tripped him with a counterweight, and Garn collapsed across the threshold. Ren pinned him to the floor with his knee and held him down. He didn't strike any more than necessary. He looked down at the supervisor and said nothing. People were already rushing up the stairs at the commotion. Theo, awakened by the crash, was the first to burst through the doorway, followed by shouts. Soon the room was filled with workers and students, and finally Instructor Hoyne arrived with a lantern. He surveyed the smashed door, the two men lying on the floor, Garn pinned to the floor, and Ren lying on top of him. He asked what had happened here. The workers who had seen the door blown off told the truth. The caretaker and his men had come into the student's room at night. No bylaw covered a nighttime attack on a student in his own room, but there was no way to justify it either. Garn lay there realizing that this time he wouldn't be able to come up with a quick reply. There were too many witnesses. Hoyne ordered the supervisor to be arrested and held until morning, when the commandant would take over. He looked at Ren, at the two defeated attackers, and at the ransacked room, and said not a word about how a single battered student had taken down three of them. He merely nodded to himself like a man whose long-held suspicion had finally been confirmed. In the morning, the matter was referred to Osmond. The commandant heard the accounts of the staff and students. He didn't like cracks, and here the crack was finally fully exposed. The supervisor, who had been under observation to ensure the records were falsified, had attacked a student in his room at night in front of witnesses. Osmond didn't try to cover anything up in response. He removed Garn from his position and sent him down via his own beloved paperwork, now honest. Garn was taken away by very same way he had threatened Ren so many times. He didn't look at Ren as he left. He had nothing to say. Thus ended Ren's first war. The one who had set everything in motion had vanished from the tier. Ren stood in the courtyard and felt no sense of triumph. He felt exhaustion and a strange silence. Hoyne approached him and said that he now understood what kind of person he had once seen long ago. He said that Ren, too, had risen against the odds through defeat, and that back then he hadn't been able to protect him. He said that this time it had turned out differently. He looked at Ren and said plainly that leaky veins weren't a death sentence if a student had learned to win without them, and that it was time for Ren to stop hiding in the outer circle, that soon there would be a major selection for the middle circle of the forges, where admission was based not on endurance but on skill, and that no one there would go easy on him, but no one would be able to write him off on paper either. Ren listened and realized that with Garn's end, only the first stage of his journey had come to a close. Ahead lay a circle where the opponents were stronger and the stakes were higher. Theo stood beside him and said he'd go with him wherever he went. Ren went up to his room with a broken-down door. He sat down on the cot. The light flickered. A chill spread across the floor. The ghost stood in the middle of the room. But this time it wasn't looking for a fight. It just stood there, staring straight at Ren. For the first time ever, the figure seemed to see him. Ren looked at it, not understanding what that meant. He knew only that there would be many defeats ahead, and that each one would still work in his favor. He lay down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the selection for the middle circle would begin. And there opponents awaited him, ones worth losing to at least once. Cornered, Garn, along with two others, attacks Ren right in his room that night, and for the first time, Ren wins without relying on the ghost's prepared lesson, combining all the fighting techniques he had previously learned from Daigo Kurt with the bowl technique, a display of his newfound growth. There were too many witnesses to the attack, so Commandant Osmond removed Garn from his post and sent him down, bringing Ren's first war to a close. Mentor Hoyne revealed that he had already seen his student grow through defeat and called Ren to the grand selection for the middle circle of the blacksmiths, where candidates are judged by skill rather than endurance, and for the first time the ghost looked directly at Ren, as if it had begun to see him. The selection for the middle circle began the next morning in the great hall of the Foundry Wing, a place Ren had never entered before. Everything was different here. The vaults were higher. The mentors were stricter. Students from all tiers of the Foundry had gathered under one roof, and nearly every one of them controlled mana far better than Ren. Hoyne led him and Theo to the edge of the hall and said that here they wouldn't be tested on defense. Here they would fight, and they would see who could hold their ground. He said that only a third of those who came would be accepted. The rest would be sent back down through the circles. The selection organizer read out the rules. Each contestant would face 3 matches against assigned opponents. Whoever won at least 2 out of 3 would advance. Whoever lost 2 would be eliminated. Ren grasped the crux of the matter immediately. 3 fights in a row, and not a single night's rest in between. The ghost wouldn't have time to recover from a defeat before the next match. That meant his secret weapon would be almost useless here. Here, he'd have to fight with what was already within him. He looked at his hands. They held the memories of Daigo and Kurt, dozens of street fights, and a nighttime ambush. That was quite a lot. But against the hand-picked fighters of the middle circle, it might not be enough. His first opponent was assigned to him quickly, a lanky student named Sol with a fluid fighting style. He moved smoothly and unpredictably, giving Ren nothing to latch onto. The fight began, and Ren lost the first few exchanges. His mana drained away as usual. He relied on sheer determination and what he learned. He tried Daigo's evasion. Sol dodged the evasion. He tried Kurt's weight shift. Sol was too light to be knocked down by his own weight. Ren was losing point by point, but he was doing what he did best. He was committing this Sol to memory. Every fluid line, every dodge. He was losing and memorizing. Sol took the fight confidently. His first defeat. Ren backed away to the wall, drained. Theo said quietly that if things continued this way, Ren would be eliminated after the second fight and wouldn't make it through the qualifiers until nightfall. Ren looked around the hall and thought quickly. The ghost wouldn't help between fights, but between the first and second bouts, they were given a breather while new opponents were matched up. A short one, not a whole night, just a few dozen counts. And Ren remembered how the ghost would search within the bowl, not just in battle. How it would break down any problem. And he asked himself the question for the first time. Does he even need the ghost from the outside? Or is it a part of Ren himself? He closed his eyes against the wall and began to replay the fight with Sol in his mind on his own. Without the night figure, he recalled Sol's fluid lines and searched for the key just as the ghost had. Slower, rougher, but he searched. And halfway through the break, he stumbled upon something. Sol was fluid, but always returned to a single point between his evasions. A tiny habit. Ren opened his eyes. For his second opponent, they paired him with a heavy fighter who resembled Kurt, and Ren won that fight purely on the weight of Kurt that lay within his body. One-on-one, everything came down to the third bout, and by the organizer's draw, Sol came up again for the third match because the students fought in a rotation and pairings could repeat. Ren faced the fluid fighter a second time, and now he knew the return point he found on his own without the ghost. Sol flowed in his usual manner. Ren didn't chase after evasive maneuvers. He waited for the turning point, and when Sol returned to it, Ren met him there with a strike he prepared in advance. Sol sank to the floor, bewildered. Ren took the second exchange right there, and the third. 2 out of 3 bouts. He made it through. The hall buzzed with surprise because the hole from the lower tier had made it through the qualifiers to the main ring. But Ren stood there thinking not of victory. He was thinking about how, for the first time, he found a way on his own in broad daylight without the night figure. The ghost hadn't come, but he found the key. So the ghost teachings had become a part of him over these cycles. Hoyne approached and said he'd seen Ren defeat Sol using his own discovery, not his nighttime training. He asked cautiously if Ren understood what was happening to him. Ren said he was beginning to understand. Hoyne said that the middle circle was no longer just a workshop, that everyone who grows quickly gets noticed here, and that there are people here higher up than Garn who are interested in such a student, not to punish him, but to use him. Ren went up to his room that evening and waited for the ghost to give him the first Sol in its entirety. The light flickered. A chill crept over him, but the figure stood up and did not attack. It looked at Ren and slowly raised a hand to its chest, as if pointing at both itself and him at the same time. Then it faded away without having taught him anything. Ren sat down on his bunk. He understood. The ghost no longer intended to teach him what he could now discover on his own. In the middle circle selection, 3 matches are held in a row without any nights in between, so the ghost is almost useless, and Ren is forced to fight using what he has accumulated. After losing to the agile fighter Sol, Ren, for the first time on his own without the night figure, finds Sol's weak spot during a brief daytime respite, analyzing the fight in his mind just as the ghost used to do, and passes the selection with a score of 2 out of 3. The ghost teachings have become a part of Ren himself. Hoyne warns that in the middle circle, a rising student will be noticed by people higher up than Garn, people who seek not to punish him, but to use him. And for the first time, the ghost refuses to rehearse the fight, gesturing toward himself and Ren as a single entity. That man's name was Varys, and he found Ren on the third day in the middle circle. He was neither a warden nor a commandant. He was the administrator of the registry, the very same registry of seals that kept track of all the powerful awakened in Kovalev and the entire region. Varys came not to threaten, but to make an offer. He spoke gently and referred to Ren not as a failure, but as a discovery. He said he heard about a student who could win without holding an opponent using a single technique, and that the registry had been searching for someone like that for years. He offered Ren a seal, not the stigmatizing mark of the weakest, but the highest, restricted tier of the registry. He said that with the seal, Ren would receive protection, the best mentors, access to the deepest tiers, protection from any Garn for all time. He said that in return, Ren would simply be registered in the registry as one of its assets, as an asset. Ren listened, and something in those words bothered him. He asked what it meant to be registered as an asset. Varys smiled and said it was a mere formality, that all the strong awakened are listed in the registry, that their battles, their growth, and their rare gifts are recorded in classified entries, and the registry decides where to deploy them. Ren understood. Behind the fancy words lay the same thing they'd been doing to him his whole life. They were assigning him a price. Only before, they'd set the price low and mark it down. Now they were setting it high and marking it up. But in both cases, someone else was deciding how much he was worth and where to put him. Ren didn't answer right away. He asked for time. Varys said he'd give him 9 days. He said it like a man certain the offer was too good to refuse. And he left. Ren told Hoyne and Theo everything that evening. Theo lit up and said this was their salvation, that the registry's seal meant the end of all their troubles, that no overseer would ever touch him again. Hoyne was silent for a long time. Then he said something bitter. He said that a student he'd known for a long time, one who'd grown through defeat, had also received such a seal, and that the seal hadn't saved him but had ruined him, that the registry had taken him into a closed line and sent him into battles that served the registry's needs, not his own, and that he burned out fulfilling someone else's record before he had a chance to become himself. Hoyne said that the mark isn't freedom, it's an expensive collar. Ren sat and thought. He thought about how his whole life he'd been someone else's line in the ledger, a line in Garn's ledger, a line in the commandant's ledger, and now he was being offered the chance to become the registry's most valuable line, and that the question of his entire story turned out not to be whether he was weak or strong. The question was who had the right to set his price, himself or some outside registry. Ren asked Hoyne if he could refuse the seal without repercussions. Hoyne said that refusal would anger the registry, but as long as Ren remained in the inner circle and in plain sight, they wouldn't touch him openly. He said that the registry didn't like to lose its fines and that Varys wouldn't back down so easily. Ren realized he had found a new enemy, greater than any before. Not a person, but a system of records that stood above all people. There had been a battle against Garn. Against the commandant, there was Garn's foreign lie. Against the registry, there was neither one nor the other. There was only the power to decide a person's worth. Ren went up to his quarters during those 9 days, troubled for the first time, not before a battle, but before a choice. He sat down on his bunk. The light flickered. A chill crept in. A ghost stood in the middle of the room. And for the first time ever, it did not stand at attention, nor at the bowl, nor at the task. It sat on the edge of the bunk next to Ren, just as a person would sit. And it looked at the registration plate in Ren's hands, at the old mark of the weakest. Ren realized that the ghost was not showing him a battle, it was showing him the mark itself. The very right of a stranger's hand to assign a number to a person. Ren looked at the translucent figure of himself and thought that the true opponent he needed to lose to and understand was not Varys. It was the world's very habit of assigning a price to people, and that the ghost wouldn't fight this battle for him. He had to win this one himself. Varys, the keeper of the registry of seals, offers Ren the highest-ranking sealed mark, granting him the patronage of mentors and protection, in exchange for Ren being registered in the registry as his property. Ren realizes that behind the fancy words lies the same practice of assigning a price to a person as the mark of the weakest, only this one is more expensive, and Hoyne reveals that a former student who grew through defeat received such a seal and was consumed while fulfilling someone else's agenda. The central question of the story takes shape. Who has the right to assign a price to a person, the person himself or someone else's account? Against the registry there is neither battle nor a cup, and this choice is one the ghost cannot resolve. Ren spent the first of his 9 days not on answering Varys, but but on understanding the registry in its entirety. He followed the same path as always. He analyzed his opponent before confronting him. Theo secretly led him to the lower chambers where the old records were kept. For a few coins, the scribe showed him how the restricted entries were organized. Ren read through the nights. He learned that the registry had been keeping records of the powerful awakened for over 100 years, that every rare bearer of a gift was entered into a closed row, and that once in that row, a person could never leave alive of their own free will. That the registry decided who to send where and in which battles to burn them. That the names in the closed rows changed quickly because the discoveries were burned one after another, while the records remained. Ren looked at the long columns of names and recalled Hoyna's words about the student who had been burned. He found his entry. A brief note, the gift of growth through defeat, taken by the registry. Exhausted. A single word, exhausted, stood where a person's entire life had once been. Ren closed the list. He realized that the registry wasn't a villain or a resentful overseer. It was a record-keeping machine that had been operating for 100 years and didn't care who it ground down. You couldn't step into the ring against a machine like that. You couldn't bring it down to someone else's weight. You couldn't disgrace it like Garna had done in front of her superior, because there was no superior above the registry. Ren thought for a long time and grasped the crux of the matter. The accounting machine relies on one thing: secrecy. The closed lines are closed precisely because no one on the outside knows how the fines are consumed. The apprentices dream of the seal as a salvation precisely because they do not see the word expended. If the inner circle and the entire blacksmith guild saw the hidden lines, the seal would cease to be a reward. It would become a brand more valuable than before, but a brand nonetheless. And a brand that everyone sees loses its power. Ren realized that his weapon against the registry was not combat, but light, to reveal to everyone what is hidden. Just as he had revealed the casting crack to the courtyard. Just as he had revealed the tailored measure to the commandant. He had been winning the entire time in one way. He exposed the false premise and made it visible. And the world's greatest ledger could be shattered in the same way. But Ren understood the cost. Exposing the registry meant going against the system, against all the overseers and commandants at once. Varus would not forgive him. The registry would not forgive him. It was a battle with no way out. He explained the plan to Hoyne and Theo. Theo was terrified and said that this was no longer Garn. It was the end of everything. That the registry would crush them and leave no trace. Hoyne was silent for a long time. Then he said that he regretted his whole life that he hadn't been able to save his former student. That back then he remained silent before the registry, and the student had been burned alive. He said that if Ren decided to uncover the sealed entries, he, Hoyne, would stand by his side and confirm everything he'd seen over the years. That his word as a middle circle mentor carried some weight. Ren realized that for the first time, the war wouldn't be just for him alone. That two others had stood by his side of their own free will. He thought about how to bring the secret into the light. The lists were kept deep within, and taking them out meant stealing government property. The registry would declare it a forgery, and any discussion of the contents would be drowned out by talk of theft, just as they tried to drown out Garna's breach by talking about sabotage. So it couldn't be taken out secretly. You had to force the registry itself to open the records in front of witnesses. Ren recalled how he had cornered Garn into an inspection he could not avoid in front of everyone. That meant Varus too had to be cornered into a situation where refusing to open the entries would be worse than opening them. He devised a plan. He would verbally accept Varus's proposal. He would agree to the seal. But he would demand one condition in the presence of witnesses from the middle circle, to show him his future line and the lines of the previous bearers of his own gift before he signed. As a student who had the right to know what he was signing, to refuse in front of witnesses would mean revealing that the lines concealed something they were ashamed of. To open them would mean revealing a word that had been exhausted by all. Ren returned to his quarters at the end of the 6th day. The light flickered. The ghost stood up and for the first time showed him a gesture of its own. Not a combat move. It raised his palm and opened it toward the light, as if revealing something that had been hidden. Ren realized that even the nocturnal figure agreed. The true technique was not a strike, but a revelation. Ren studies the register as an adversary and learns that the closed lines grind down rare bearers of the gift, and that a former student with the same gift of growth through his defeats is recorded with the word exhausted. He understands that the register is a century-old accounting machine that cannot be destroyed in battle, but which relies on the secrecy of the closed lines. Therefore, his weapons, light and revelation, remain as before, with Garn's crack and a tailored measure. He devises a strategy. to agree to the seal, but in the presence of witnesses from the middle circle, to demand that they reveal his future line and the lines of former gift-bearers. And for the first time, Hoyne and Theo stand beside him of their own free will. On the 9th day, Ren gave his answer to Varys and did so in full view of the entire middle circle. He approached the registry administrator in the Great Hall, in the presence of mentors and students, and declared loudly that he accepted the seal. Varys smiled, pleased that his fine had not slipped away. He took out the seal plate and the record scroll. He said that all that was needed was to sign the entry into the restricted line. Ren said just as loudly, so that the entire hall could hear, that he would sign with pleasure. But he asked for the right granted to anyone who signs, to see what he was signing. He asked to be shown his future line, and the lines of previous bearers of his own rare gift, so he might know what fate awaited him under this seal. He said he had no doubts about the registry, and therefore Varys had nothing to hide. The hall fell silent. The request sounded modest and reasonable. A student wants to know what he is signing. It was impossible to refuse without everyone thinking the same thing, that something bad was being hidden in the lines. Varys stopped smiling. He said that the sealed lines were sealed precisely so that they would not be shown. Ren asked calmly why the discovery was being hidden from her. If the seal is an honor, then one takes pride in that honor rather than hiding it. If it is an honor, let the hall see what fate awaits one marked by the gift of growth through defeat. Mentor Hoyne stepped forward from the wall. He said that, as a middle circle mentor, he could attest to one thing, that he had once known a student with the very same gift, that the student had received such a seal right before his eyes, and that he had never seen that student alive again. He asked the registry to show the hall that student's line since the topic was honor. A murmur rippled through the hall. Now Varys could no longer remain silent. Refusal after the mentor's words would sound like an admission. Varys found himself in exactly the same predicament into which Ren had driven all his enemies, to open the records and reveal the truth, or to refuse and confirm that the truth was terrifying. He was a man of the system, not a fighter, and he was unable to escape the trap set in the open hall. He tried to say that the records were not meant for students, but the middle circle selection officer, a man not from the registry, said that since the matter concerned a student of the hall, the line should be shown in front of witnesses. Otherwise, it would appear that the seal was being affixed blindly. Even his own people had turned their backs on the secret. Under everyone's gaze, Varys unrolled the scroll of sealed lines. Hoyne named the former student. The scribe found the entry and read it aloud. The gift of growth through defeat, taken by the registry. And the final word. Exhausted. The hall fell silent. The word hung in the silence. The students who had dreamed of the seal heard for the first time what became of those who were marked. Hoyne ordered him to read on, line by line, and the scribe read, gift after gift. And next to almost every rare name stood the same word, exhausted, extinguished, written off. The hall, which an hour ago had envied Ren's seal, now stared at the scroll in horror. The seal ceased to be an honor before everyone's eyes. It became what it truly was, a costly brand behind which a foreign registry ground people down for its own gain. Varys stood over the unfurled scroll and realized that he had not lost to Ren. He had lost to the world. What had been kept secret for 100 years collapsed in the space of a single column read aloud. Ren spoke in the silence that had fallen. He said he would not renounce his gift nor hand it over to a line where it would be extinguished. He said he was not an item in the registry nor a line in someone else's ledger. He said that his whole life someone had been assigning a number to him, the weakest at the bottom, the fine at the top, and that this number had always been assigned by a stranger's hand. He said that from now on it was over. Not just for him, for everyone in this hall whose name would one day be entered into a sealed line. He turned to the hall and said that now everyone had seen the truth, and the truth could no longer be hidden away. Varys tried to gather up the scroll, but it was too late. Too many eyes had read too many lines. The head of the selection committee ordered that the scroll be left for higher-up review. The register, which had never been accountable to anyone, was now for the first time under the scrutiny of the entire circle. Ren left the hall, not with the seal, but without it, and that was more powerful than any seal. Hoyne walked beside him and said quietly that the former student had finally been avenged, not by the enemy's death, but by the fact that his line had been read aloud. Theo walked on the other side, silent and shaken. Ren realized that for the first time in his life, no one had assigned him a value. Not the court, not the overseer, not the registry. He had determined his own worth by refusing to be anyone's line. Ren publicly agrees to the seal, but in front of the entire inner circle demands to see his future line and the lines of former bearers of the gift, while Hoyne testifies about the burned-out student and corners Varys into a dilemma where refusal is tantamount to admission. The registry is forced to open the sealed lines, and the hall hears the word exhausted, spoken almost against every rare name, which is why, before everyone's eyes, the seal transforms from an honor into a brand. Ren refuses to be a line in someone else's ledger. The registry's secret crumbles before witnesses, and for the first time, no one but himself sets his price. The morning after the entries were revealed, the forge awoke a different place. What had been read aloud could not be taken back, and it spread through the tiers faster than any rumor. The registry, which had been sustained by secrecy for 100 years, now stood under the gaze of everyone who had heard the word expendable. Varys did not appear in the inner circle. It was said that the administrator had been summoned higher up for an investigation, and that the sealed entries had been ordered open for inspection. The accounting machine didn't collapse overnight, but for the first time in 100 years, its wheel had been stopped so they could see what it was grinding. Ren stood by the tall window of the foundry wing and looked down at the tiers receding into the distance. He thought about the path he had traveled, the leaky bowl from the lower courtyard, the weakest of the weak whom every newcomer could knock down. He remembered his first fight with Daigo and the first escape the ghost had given him. He remembered the bowl and froze at the thought of Garn's tailored measure. He remembered Kurt and the rumor of theft and the tear in his uniform and the nighttime attack and the commandant and the registry. And he realized that all these enemies were, in fact, one and the same. Each of them had set a price on his head through someone else's hand, and his entire journey had been one long refusal to accept someone else's figure. Hoyne approached and stood beside him by the window. He said that in all his years at the forge he'd seen a lot, but he'd never seen a day like this. He said that the former apprentice he failed to save had now been avenged, not with blood, but with light. That his entry had been read aloud, and that now no discovery would be hidden in a locked entry as easily as before. He said that Ren had done what he himself had been unable to do. Ren asked what would happen to him now. He hadn't entered the registry. He had disgraced it in front of witnesses. Hoyne said that the registry was weakened and open to scrutiny, and at a time like this he had no time for revenge against a single student. That for the first time, Ren stood not under someone else's authority, but outside of it, free. And that this freedom had been bought dearly and would still have to be defended. But that Ren now knew better than anyone how to defend it. Theo found them by the window. He was no longer that downtrodden worker with scorched fingers who had been the first to stand up for Ren when the whole courtyard was laughing. He carried himself with more poise. He said that on the lower tiers, all anyone was talking about was the leaker who had breached the registry. That students who had been labeled with a low number their whole lives had raised their heads for the first time. That some were already asking on what grounds a person is labeled at all before they'd even proven themselves. Ren listened and realized that he had changed more than just his own fate. He had changed the very habit of a world that first brands and then observes. That evening, he returned to his cramped room under the roof with the door that had never been repaired. Everything was just as it had been on that first night. The bunk, the small table, the cracked window. He sat down and took out his old identification plate. It still bore the mark of the weakest, the rank of the weakest. Retention, 2/10. He stared at the number he had hated for 18 years. And for the first time, he felt neither shame nor fear. The number remained the same. His veins had never learned to hold mana. He remained a leaky vessel by the registry's standards, but that standard no longer defined who he was. He placed the plate on the table, the mark facing down. The light from the oil lamp flickered. A chill spread through the room just like on that very first night. The ghost stood in the middle of the room, semi-transparent, wearing the same old jacket with worn elbows, with the same face. But this time he didn't take a stance, nor did he approach the bowl or the task. He stood upright and looked at Ren, and Ren looked at him. They were no longer fighting on opposite sides of defeat. Ren finally realized that the ghost wasn't some foreign force or a gift from outside. The ghost was that part of him that refused to give up when his body did, the part that got back up after every fall and kept searching for a way until it found one. Through all those cycles, that figure had fought the battles for him. But in reality, it was teaching him one thing, that defeat is not the end, but a condition that can be analyzed. That your worth is determined not by the one who knocked you to the floor, but by the one who gets back up afterward. Ren rose from the cot and stepped toward the figure. He raised his palm just as the ghost had raised it that night when it revealed the secret. The ghost raised its hand to meet his. Their palms touched, Cold met warmth, and the figure was drawn into him completely. It didn't fade away before dawn as it had before. It entered and remained. Ren stood alone in the middle of the room and felt that, for the first time ever, he and his stubborn side had become one. There would no longer be a separate ghost working through his defeats at night, because now Ren himself knew how to get back up after every fall and keep searching until he found a way. He walked over to the cracked window and looked out at the tiers of the forge in the evening light. Somewhere below was the courtyard, where every newcomer had knocked him down. Somewhere there was the measuring hall, the shattered room, and the great hall where a century-old secret had crumbled. He had gone through it all from bottom to top, not by holding on to mana, but by getting back up after every defeat. He was no longer anyone's line, neither low nor high. He was the one who decided for himself what was worth it. And this wasn't taught to him by the registry, nor by a mentor, nor by the chalice. This was taught to him by the ghost that was himself. Ren turned away from the window. Ahead lay a night without a nocturnal figure, the first in a long time. He lay down on his bunk and closed his eyes. He no longer needed to lose in order to win. He already knew how things unfolded. Leak lines spread throughout the forge. The registry's century-old secret had collapsed. The tracking machine was stopped for inspection, and Varys vanished amid the turmoil above, and for the first time, Ren faced no threat of retribution. Hoyne confirms that the former student has been avenged by light, not blood, and that Ren now stands outside any external record, free. In the finale, Ren realizes that the ghost was not an outside force, but his own unyielding part, which taught him that defeat is merely a condition for analysis, and that one's worth is determined by the one who rises after a fall, not by the one who knocks them down. And when the ghost merges with him, Ren ceases to be anyone's entry and becomes the one who decides for himself what he is worth. Ren spent the first of his 9 days not on a response to Varys, but on understanding the registry in its entirety. He followed the same path he always had. He analyzed his opponent before facing him. He'd done things this way his whole life. He didn't rush at the enemy. Instead, he'd first let the enemy have the upper hand and observe what the opponent was made of. Theo secretly led him to the lower chambers where the old records were kept. For a few coins, the scribe showed him how the sealed entries were structured. The scribe was old and had been under surveillance his entire life. He spoke softly, as if the walls themselves could carry his words. He said this was the first and last time he would show it to anyone. Ren read by the dim light of a lamp at night. He learned that the registry had been keeping records of the powerful awakened for over 100 years, that every rare bearer of a gift was entered into a closed row, that once a person entered this list, they could never leave alive of their own free will, that the registry decided who to send where and in which battles to burn them, that the names in the closed lists changed rapidly because the discoveries were burned one after another while the records remained. Ren looked at the long columns of names and recalled Hoyne's words about the apprentice who had been burned. He searched for his entry for a long time. The lists were enormous. The columns stretched across dozens of pages and almost all the names were crossed out. He found it at the end of the second night, a brief entry, the gift of growth through defeat, taken by the registry. Exhausted. A single word, exhausted, stood where a person's entire life had once been. Ren stared at that word for a long time. He thought about how that student had been just like him, how he too had gotten back up after every fall, how he too had found a way to win without strength, and that for this he wasn't protected, he was burned. Ren closed the list and sat in the darkness. He realized that the registry wasn't a villain or a resentful overseer. It was a record-keeping machine that had been operating for 100 years and didn't care who it ground down. It had no evil face to strike. Garn had a face. The commandant had a face. The registry had only a wheel that spun on its own. You couldn't step into the ring against a machine like that. You couldn't bring it down with someone else's weight like Kurt. You can't disgrace it in front of a superior like you did with Garna, because there was no superior within reach above the registry. Ren thought long and gloomily. For the first time, he couldn't see a way out. He was used to every opponent having a weak spot, Saul's point of no return, Garna's tailored measure, the form's inherent flaw. But the accounting machine seemed to have no weak spot. It was right according to its own rules. It didn't kill anyone directly. It merely counted in cent. He ran this through his mind night after night, just as a ghost relived a battle. He took the registry apart piece by piece and put it back together. And on the fourth night, he stumbled upon the key. The accounting machine rests on one thing, secrecy. The closed lines are closed precisely because no one on the outside knows how the findings are consumed. The students dream of the seal as salvation precisely because they do not see the word expend. None of those who envied the seal ever read these columns. If the middle circle of the courtyard and the entire blacksmith's workshop had seen the hidden lines, the seal would have ceased to be a reward. It would have become a brand, more valuable than before, but a brand nonetheless. And a brand that everyone sees loses its power. Ren recalled how he had triumphed the entire way using the same tactic. He exposed the false premise and made it visible. He showed the courtyard that the crack was caused by casting, not by sabotage. He showed the commandant that the measurement had been tailored to the answer. He never once won by force. He won with light, by pulling what was hidden out into the open, where everyone could see it. And the world's greatest account could be shattered by the same method as the overseer's petty lie, to reveal to everyone what was hidden. He sat more upright in the darkness. For the first time in 4 nights he saw the key, but Ren understood the price of that key. To break into the registry meant going against the system, against all the overseers and commandants at once. This was not Garn, whom Hoyne had covered for. Not a commandant who could be circumvented by someone else's lie. It was the power to decide a person's worth, and that power showed no mercy to those who exposed it. Varys would not forgive. The registry would not forgive. This was a fight with no backup plan. If Ren lost it, he would never get back up again. He laid out the plan to Hoyne and Theo on the 5th day in a cramped room behind a closed door. Theo was terrified and said that this wasn't Garn anymore, it was the end of everything. That the registry would crush them and leave no trace. That the 3 of them were nothing against the century-old machine. He spoke quickly, and his scorched fingers trembled. Ren let him finish. Then he said he understood the risk, but that to remain silent was to agree that people were being priced by someone else's hand and burned according to the records. That he himself had been a low number for 18 years, and didn't want anyone to become a high number just to be burned. Hoyne was silent for a long time. He stared out the cracked window. Then he said something bitter. He said that his whole life he regretted not being able to save his former student, that back then he remained silent before the registry, that he feared for his position and for his peaceful old age, and that the student had been consumed while he, Hoyne, was left to live with that silence. He said that if Ren decided to uncover the sealed records, he would stand by his side and confirm everything he had witnessed over the years, that his word as a mentor of the middle circle carried some weight, and that this time he would not remain silent. Ren realized that for the first time, the war would not be fought for him alone, that 2 had stood by his side of their own free will, not out of calculation. Theo was still afraid, but he said that since Ren had stood up for him at the foundry, he wouldn't back down now either. Ren began to think about how to bring the secret to light. The lists were kept deep within, and taking them out meant stealing government property. He knew how this would turn out. The STR would declare it a forgery and theft, and any discussion of the line's contents would be drowned out by talk of the apprentice stealing the lists, just as they tried to drown out Garn's crack by talking about a defect in the casting. The enemy always tried to shift the conversation from substance to form. So he couldn't take them out secretly. He couldn't steal them. He had to force the registry itself to open the entries in front of witnesses of its own accord. Ren recalled how he cornered Garn into an inspection he couldn't avoid in front of everyone. How a refusal would sound worse than consent. That meant Varys, too, had to be cornered into a situation where refusing to open the entries would be more shameful than opening them. He thought about this on the 6th and 7th days, and he came up with a plan. He would verbally accept Varys's offer. He would agree to the seal in front of everyone. But he would demand one condition in the presence of witnesses from the middle circle, to show him his future line and the lines of the previous bearers of his own gift before he signed. For anyone who signs has the right to know what they are signing. To refuse in front of witnesses would mean revealing that the lines concealed something they were ashamed of. To open them would mean revealing a word that had been exhausted by all. Ren examined the sequence from every angle, just as he would examine a fight. He looked for where Varys might be able to wriggle out of it. He plugged every loophole in advance. He went up to his quarters at the end of the 6th day, exhausted not in body, but in mind. The light flickered. A chill crept across the floor. The ghost stood up and for the first time showed him the movement himself. Not a fighting move. It raised its palm and slowly opened it toward the lamp's light, as if unveiling something hidden. It held his palm open for a long time so that Ren would understand. Ren realized that even the figure in the night agreed with him, that the true technique against the registry is neither a strike nor a throw. It is opening up. An open palm instead of a clenched fist. Light instead of strength. He watched as the ghost lowered its hand and faded away, and thought about how the greatest battle of his life lay ahead, and that his weapon in it would not be the strength he lacked, but the truth he had seen with his own eyes in those columns. Ren spends his nights studying the registry's lists as if they were an enemy, and finds an entry for a former student with the gift of growth through defeat, marked with the word exhausted. Realizing that the registry is a century-old accounting machine without a malevolent face that cannot be toppled by force, he feels his way toward the only key. The machine is sustained by the secrecy of its hidden lines, and it will collapse if they're exposed in public, just as he once exposed a cast and crack and a tailored measurement. He cannot steal the lists, otherwise the conversation will shift to theft, so Ren devises a plan to corner Varys. He agrees to the seal, but in the presence of witnesses from the middle circle, demands to see his future line and the lines of previous bearers of the gift, while Hoyne and Theo stand beside him of their own free will for the first time. On the 9th day, Ren gave Varys his answer, and he did so in full view of the entire middle circle. He chose a time when the Great Hall was full. The mentors were evaluating the students after the selection process. The students were waiting their turn by the walls. Ren approached the registry administrator openly so that everyone could see and hear him. He said loudly that he was accepting the seal. Varys raised his head and smiled, pleased that his find had not slipped away. He had been waiting for this answer for all 9 days, confident in it. He took out the seal plate and the registration scroll and said he was pleased with this sensible choice. He said that all that was needed was to sign the entry into the closed line, and that a better life than any student in this hall could imagine awaited Ren. Ren said just as loudly so that the entire hall could hear that he would sign with joy, but he asked for the right of anyone who signs to see what he was signing. He asked to be shown his future line as well as the lines of previous bearers of his own rare gift so he could know what fate awaited him under this seal. He said calmly and without defiance that he had no doubts about the registry and therefore Varys had nothing to hide. The hall fell silent. The request sounded modest and reasonable. A student wants to know what he is signing before binding himself forever. No one in the hall saw this as audacity. On the contrary, many thought it was the right thing to do. It was impossible to refuse without everyone thinking the same thing, that something bad was being hidden in the lines. Varys stopped smiling. He sensed the trap but could not yet see its edges. He said that the sealed lines were sealed precisely so that they would not be shown to anyone. That this had been the registry's practice for 100 years. Ren asked calmly why the discovery was being hidden from her. He said that if the seal was an honor, then one takes pride in that honor rather than hiding it. If this is an honor, let the hall see what fate awaits the one marked by the gift of growth through defeat. They hide only what they are ashamed of. He spoke calmly and every word fell heavily into the silence of the hall. Varys searched for an answer but could find no good one. Any refusal now sounded like an admission that something shameful was being hidden behind the mark. Then Mentor Hoyne stepped forward from the wall. He walked slowly, like a man who had been silent for a long time and had finally made up his mind. He said that, as a mentor of the middle circle, he could attest to one thing, that he had once known a student with that very same gift of growth through defeat. Had the student ever seen the same seal before his very eyes many years ago, and that he had never seen that student alive again. He said he had kept silent about this for years and regretted his silence every day, and that he would no longer remain silent. He asked the registry to show the hall the entry for that student, since the topic of the seal's honor had come up. A murmur rippled through the hall. The students exchanged glances. The old mentor's words carried great weight. Now it was impossible for Varys to remain silent. A refusal after Hoyne's testimony would sound like a direct admission. Varys found himself in exactly the same predicament into which Ren had driven all his enemies, from Garn to the Commandant. Reveal the entries and bring the truth to light. Or refuse and confirm that the truth is terrifying. He was a man of the system, not a fighter. He was used to the registry answering to no one, and in the open hall with witnesses present, he was unable to escape the trap. He tried to say that the lists were not meant for the students' eyes, that this was a matter for the registry, not the circle. But then the administrator of the middle circle's selection process spoke up, a man not from the registry but from the forge itself. He said that since the matter concerned a student of this hall and his signature, they should show the entry in front of the witnesses. Otherwise, it would appear that the seal was being affixed blindly, and as the administrator, he could not certify a blind signature. So even his own people turned their backs on the secret. The registry had insisted that it hadn't been inspected, and now they were being asked to verify it from within the forge itself. Varys stood alone under the watchful gaze of the entire hall. He realized he had lost even before he unrolled the scroll. He slowly unfurled the sealed lines. Hoyne named a former student. The scribe, summoned by the administrator, found the line and read it aloud. The gift of growth through defeat, taken by the register. And the final word, exhausted. The hall fell silent. The word hung in the silence of the high-ceilinged hall. The students who had dreamed of the seal heard for the first time what became of those who were marked. Hoyne ordered them to read on, line by line. He said that if this was an honor, let the hall hear all the names of that honor. And the scribe read amid the general silence. The gift of fire, taken, exhausted. The gift of stone, taken, extinguished. The gift of swift blood, taken, written off. Almost opposite every rare name stood one of these words, column after column. The hall, which an hour ago had envied Ren's seal, listened and grew pale. The seal ceased to be an honor before everyone's eyes during the time the scribe read the names. It became what it truly was, a costly brand behind which a foreign registry ground people down for its own gain and struck them off one by one. Varys stood over the unfurled scroll and realized that he had not lost to Ren or to Hoyne. He had lost to the light. What had been kept secret for 100 years collapsed in the space of a single column read aloud. A secret cannot be sealed away again once it has been heard by hundreds of ears. Ren spoke in the silence that followed. He said he would not renounce his gift nor hand it over to a line where it would be extinguished. He said he was not an object in the registry, nor a line in someone else's ledger. He said that his whole life someone had been assigning him a number. Down below, they called him the weakest and marked him with a low number. Up above, they called him a find and marked him with a high one. And that this number had always been assigned by someone else's hand. That only the value changed, but the essence remained the same. Someone else decided what he was worth. He said that from now on that was over, not just for him, for everyone in this hall whose name might one day be entered into a sealed line and crossed out. He turned to the hall and said that now everyone had seen the truth, and the truth could no longer be hidden away, no matter how hard they tried. Varys tried to gather up the scroll, but it was too late. Too many eyes had read too many lines. The head of the selection committee ordered the scroll to be left in place for higher review. The register, which for 100 years had answered to no one, was now for the first time under the gaze of a whole circle of people. Ren left the hall not with the seal, but without it, and that was more powerful than any seal. Hoyne walked beside him and said quietly that the former student had finally been avenged, not by the enemy's death, not by blood, but by the fact that his line had been read aloud in front of everyone, and that now he would not be forgotten. Theo walked on the other side, silent and shaken by what he had seen. Ren realized that for the first time in his life, no one had assigned him a value. Not the court, not the overseer, not the commandant, not the registry. He had assigned it himself by refusing to be someone else's line in a foreign ledger. Ren publicly, in front of the entire assembly, agrees to the seal but demands to see his future entry and the entries of previous bearers of the gift. And Mentor Hoyne, breaking his long-standing silence, testifies about his burned-out student and, together with the selection administrator, corners Varys into a dilemma where refusal is tantamount to admission. The registry is forced to open the sealed records, and the hall hears the words exhausted, extinguished, and written off read out almost opposite every rare name, which is why the seal before everyone's eyes transforms from an honor into a brand. Ren refuses allowed to be an entry in someone else's registry, declaring that his worth has been determined by another's hand his entire life and that this is now over for everyone in the hall, while the registry's secret was irrevocably shattered before hundreds of witnesses. The morning after the lines were revealed, the forge awoke a different place. What had been read aloud could not be taken back, and it spread through the tiers faster than any rumor. By noon, people were talking about the sealed entries in the workshops, in the courtyards, and on the lower tiers, places where no one had ever even heard of the registry. The registry, which had been kept secret for 100 years, now lay exposed to the gaze of everyone who had heard the word exhausted. Varys did not appear in the inner circle. It was said that the administrator had been summoned higher up for an investigation, that the closed records had been ordered open for inspection by people not appointed by the registry, that for the first time in 100 years the accounting wheel had been stopped to see what it was grinding. The machine hadn't collapsed overnight. Machines like that don't collapse all at once, but it had been stopped. And once a machine is stopped, people examine it from every angle. Once taken apart, it's never put back together the same way. Ren stood by the tall window of the foundry wing and looked at the tears receding into the morning mist. He thought about the path he had traveled, the leaky bowl from the lower courtyard, the weakest one whom every newcomer would knock down amid general laughter. He recalled his first fight with Daigo and the first escape the ghost had granted him on that cold night. He remembered the bowl and froze at the thought of Garn's measure adjusted to 20. He remembered Kurt and the rumor of mana theft, the crack in the foundry mold, and the nighttime attack with the broken-down door. He remembered the commandant by the tall window and the registry administrator with his soft voice. And he realized that all these enemies were in fact one and the same. Each of them had set a price for him with someone else's hand. Garn had set the price of a write-off for him. The commandant had set the price of a crack in the records. Varys assigned the price of a valuable find destined for burning, and his entire journey from the bottom to the top had been one long refusal to accept someone else's number. Horn approached and stood beside him by the window. He said that in all his years at the forge he had seen a great deal, but he had never seen a day like yesterday. He said that the former student he had failed to save had now been avenged, not with blood, but with light. That his entry had been read aloud, and that from now on no fine would be hidden in a sealed entry as easily as before. He said that Ren had done what he himself had been unable to do in his entire life, that he had cast off his old silence and was finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Ren asked what would become of him now. He hadn't entered the registry. He had disgraced it in front of witnesses. Such a thing is not forgiven. Hoyne said that the registry was weakened and open to scrutiny, and that at a time like this, it had no time for revenge against a single disciple. That the machine was busy saving itself, not meting out retribution. That for the first time, Ren stood not under someone else's control but outside of it, free. He said that this freedom had been bought at a high price and would have to be defended time and again, but that Ren now knew how to defend it better than anyone he had ever known. Theo found him by the window. He was no longer that downtrodden worker with scorched fingers who had been the first to stand up for Ren when the whole courtyard was laughing at the leaky bowl. He held himself more steadily and looked straight ahead. He said that on the lower tiers, all anyone was talking about was the leaky one who had cracked the registry. That the students who had been branded with a low number their whole lives had raised their heads for the first time. That some were already asking aloud by what right anyone was labeled before they even proven themselves. Ren listened and realized that he had changed more than just his own fate. He had shifted the very habit of the world to brand a person first and then judge them. He thought that this shift would outlive him. That even if the registry were to regroup one day, the question had already been asked aloud and could not be taken back. That evening, he returned to his cramped room under the roof with the door that had never been repaired. Everything was just as it had been on that first night. A bunk, a small table, a cracked window through which cold air blew in from the upper tiers. He sat down and took out his old identification plate. It still bore the mark of the weakest, the rank of the weakest, a retention rate of 2/10 with the norm being 1. He stared at the number he hated for 18 years, and for the first time he felt neither shame nor fear. The number remained the same. His veins had never learned to hold mana for more than a few counts. He remained a leaky vessel by the registry's standards, but that standard no longer defined who he was. He placed the plate on the table, face down. The light from the oil lamp flickered. A chill spread through the room, just like on that very first night when he lay broken and listened to the laughter of strangers. A ghost stood in the middle of the room, semi-transparent, wearing the same old jacket with worn elbows, with the same face, the same tilt of the head. But this time it didn't assume a fighting stance, nor did it approach the bowl or the task. It stood upright and looked at Ren, and Ren looked back at it. They were no longer on opposite sides of defeat. Ren finally realized that the ghost was neither a foreign force nor a gift that had come from outside. The ghost was that part of him that refused to give up when his body did, the part that got back up after every fall and kept searching for a way until it found one. Through all these cycles, the figure fought the battles for him at night, and in reality, it taught him one thing: that defeat isn't the end, but a condition that can be broken down into parts. That your worth isn't determined by the one who knocked you to the floor, but by the one who gets up after falling and looks for a different way to stand. Ren remembered how, during the tryouts, he had found Saul's weak spot on his own for the first time, without the night figure. His mind was already working just like the ghost's, and he realized that the figure hadn't been teaching him techniques. It had been teaching him to be the kind of person who doesn't stay down. He got up from the cot and stepped toward the ghost. He raised his palm open, just as the ghost itself had raised it that night when it showed him that the true technique was opening up, not striking. The ghost raised its palm to meet his. Their palms touched. The cold merged with the warmth of the living hand, and the figure was drawn into him completely. It did not fade away as before, only to return the next night. It entered and remained inside. Ren stood alone in the middle of the cramped room and felt that, for the first time ever, He and that stubborn, unyielding part of himself had become one. There would no longer be a separate ghost reenacting defeats at night in his place, because now Ren himself knew how to get back up after every fall and keep searching until he found a way. The skill was no longer something external. It had become a part of him. He walked over to the cracked window and looked out at the tiers of the forge in the evening light. Somewhere below was the courtyard where every newcomer had knocked him down. Somewhere there was the training hall, the wrecked room, and the great hall where a century-old secret had crumbled yesterday. He had gone through it all from bottom to top, and not by holding on to mana, which he never had to begin with, but by the fact that after every defeat he got back up and analyzed what had brought him down. He was no longer just a line on someone's list, neither low nor high. He was the one who decided for himself what he was worth, and this wasn't taught to him by the registry, nor by a mentor, nor by the measuring bowl. This was taught to him by the ghost that had been himself all along. Ren turned away from the window. Ahead lay a night without the night figure, the first in a long time. He lay down on his bunk and closed his eyes without fear of tomorrow's defeat. He no longer needed to lose in order to win. He already knew how to rise, and he knew that this skill was now always with him. The lines uncovered overnight spread throughout the forge. The century-old secret of the registry crumbled irrevocably. The accounting machine was stopped for inspection by outsiders, and Varus vanished amid the upheaval above, so for the first time, Ren faced no threat of revenge. Hoying confirms that the former student has been avenged by light, not blood, and that Ren now stands outside any external record free. While in the lower tiers, the students raise their heads for the first time and ask by what right a price is placed on a person before he has proven himself. In the finale, Ren realizes that all his enemies, from Garn to the registry, a price for him through others, and that the ghost was not an external force but his own indomitable part, which taught him that defeat is merely a prerequisite for reflection, and that one who rises after falling is the one who sets his own worth. The ghost merges with Ren. The ability to rise becomes part of his very being, and he finally ceases to be anyone's pawn, becoming the one who decides for himself what he is worth.